So there's reportedly a multi-billion-dollar deal in the works for the NFL that could combine two major networks in some capacity and potentially frustrate hundreds of thousands of people in the process. Well, I definitely have questions and concerns of my own that I gotta process through in today's video, but not before I go over multiple new players getting signed, Aaron Rodgers visiting with the Pittsburgh Steelers today, and much more. So let's get into it right after. First up, another defensive player just got himself a bag, and that would be Texans defensive end Danielle Hunter. He agreed to a one-year, $35.6 million extension to keep him in Houston through the 2026 season, and it makes him the second highest paid defensive end, only behind Myles Garrett. Hunter signed with them last offseason on a 2-year deal that was basically fully guaranteed as it was, and had an excellent season with 12 sacks, the 5th time in his career he's reached that mark. He and Will Anderson are already one of the most elite pass rushing duos in the game, as they combined for 23 of their team's 49 sacks in 2024, and as a team they finished 4th in total sacks. So it's definitely a win-win here for both sides. Houston keeps a star edge rusher for another season, and Danielle gets an even greater payday. Honestly, I think the Texans love sacks on both sides of the ball because, while the defense was elite at racking them up, the offense was just as impressive at allowing them last year. Stroud was the second most sacked quarterback with 52, only behind Caleb Williams, who had 68. Yes, 68, not a typo. That is a lot. That being said, that's why many eyebrows were raised when Houston surprisingly traded away their franchise left tackle in Laramie Tunsil to the Commanders a couple weeks back. They did get a pretty big haul for him, a 2025 3rd and 7th round pick, plus a 2026 2nd and 4th, sending back a 2025 4th of their own. Then they sent former first-round guard Kenyon Green to the Eagles for C.J. Gardner-Johnson, plus a future pick swap. Kenyon Green made more sense than Tunsil, as he was underperforming, allowing the 3rd highest one-on-one pressure rate, but a clear need for the Texans is to beef up their O-line, and early on in free agency, it was looking like they did the opposite. While they did make some more additions, they traded for Vikings former 2nd-round guard Ed Ingram, but he allowed the highest one-on-one pressure rate amongst guards last season. Then Houston brought in veteran guard Laken Tomlinson, who allowed the 4th highest one-on-one pressure rate. So not great so far. They then signed free agent offensive tackle Cam Robinson to a 1-year deal worth up to $14.5 million. The 8-year vet was traded from the Jags to the Vikings in the middle of the 2024 season after Christian Darrisaw tore his ACL, and he finished there in Minnesota. The thing is, Cam Robinson gave up the most pressure of any lineman in the entire NFL last year with 64. He also allowed the highest one-on-one pressure rate amongst all offensive tackles since he became the starter in Minnesota. More on him in a moment, but then today they did make another move to the line. They added another veteran free agent, signing offensive tackle Trent Brown to a 1-year deal worth up to $3 million. He was with the Bengals last season, but played in just 3 games before suffering a season-ending ruptured patella tendon knee injury, his right knee in particular. So even with that most recent addition, that's still a let's see how this goes move, and if their offensive line is better this year than last, it can't be by that much. I do want to back up a second though and be fair to Cam Robinson, because some are saying he played pretty decent in Minnesota, and the real blame belonged to Sam Darnold, as he had the second most time in the pocket of quarterbacks last season, yet processes slower than a turtle on a THC gummy. Hey, that's what some Vikings fans are saying, not me. Anyway, speaking of the devil himself, most of you know by now that Sam Darnold signed a 3-year, $100.5 million contract with the Seahawks, but it looks like Seattle might actually be able to get out of his contract after just 1 year. So if things don't go as planned this upcoming season, they could cut ties without having to eat a bunch of dead money. There's a little bit of conflicting reports out there regarding his full details, but his contract does seem to be escapable without catastrophic consequences next offseason, which is definitely interesting. Another contract worth glancing at is actually wide receiver T. Higgins, because like Darnold's, everything is not as it seems. His contract was reported to be a 4-year, $115 million deal with the first 2 years guaranteed. However, it appears the Bengals can get out of his deal after 1 season with minimal consequences if they really wanted to. With the way the contract is structured, it's really more like a 2-year deal that pays $29.45 million annually, and if for some reason they want out after next year, it would really be just a 1-year, $35.9 million deal. So basically what this means is T definitely left some securities and guarantees on the table in order to stay in Cincinnati. I mean, he was franchise tagged, so he would have had to get traded for by another team and then extended, so maybe his options were a bit thin. It's just kind of surprising because of how long he's wanted a longer-term deal with the team. He finally got one, but it's not the most secure thing he could have signed had another team actually traded for him. The Bengals made it clear they wanted these three guys all together: T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, and Joe Burrow, and I would think they would want to do right by Higgins, keeping him around for years to come, but this is a pretty tough business at the end of the day, so we shall see. And then, even though we're almost 2 full weeks into free agency at this point, there's still some pretty notable players available to be signed, one of those being wide receiver Stephon Diggs. He's 31 and coming off of an ACL tear that he suffered in late October, so there's some cause for concern, even though he should be ready for whichever team takes a chance on him by training camp. It should help said team as well to know that before Diggs got injured, he was having a very productive season in Houston. He snagged 47 catches for nearly 500 yards and 3 touchdowns in 8 games, while primarily operating as the number 2 receiver until Nico Collins went down with an injury himself. And if you go back to his 4 years in Buffalo, the guy had over 100 grabs and 1,000 yards every single season while catching at least 8 or more touchdowns. So yeah, the age and injury, it's a concern, and while he probably won't ever be the same player he was in Buffalo, he could still absolutely make an impact for whatever team ends up signing him. Well, enter the New England Patriots. He actually went and visited with them yesterday, having dinner with some of the members of the front office, as well as conducting a physical. Turn your head and cough. He left without a deal, though, and I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up taking more visits, but the Patriots are definitely the team to watch here. They don't really have a true number 1 receiver on the roster. I mean, their leading receiver from last season was Hunter Henry, who A, is a tight end, and B, only had 674 yards. Good God. The only receiver they've added in free agency so far as well is Mac Hollins, the barefoot man, who had just 31 catches last year for Buffalo. They have invested a ton into their defense this offseason, though. They signed Milton Williams, Carlton Davis, Harold Landry, and Robert Spillane, but their biggest moves on offense have been signing tackle Morgan Moses, who's 34 years old, and center Garrett Bradbury, who isn't even guaranteed to be a starter. So yeah, they should 100% take a shot on Diggs to bring in a solid veteran who can in theory be a reliable target for Drake May, assuming he's healthy. They do pick 4th overall and have multiple 3rd-round picks as well, so I'm guessing at least one of their early picks will be on a receiver, and they could in theory even trade back in the 1st round to accumulate some more picks, and that should only help them a bit more. They also reportedly have the most cap space in the NFL, so more moves could be made here sooner rather than later. For example, we've had a couple wide receiver moves happen here very recently. The first involves the former Cowboy Michael Gallup. He was a 3rd-round pick by Dallas in 2018, having a 1,000-yard season with them in 2019 before his final 3 seasons didn't top 500 yards. If you remember, he actually retired last July, pretty surprisingly, after signing with the Raiders, saying he wasn't in the right headspace. He battled through a little bit of injury in the last few years. He tore his ACL in 2021, and his production dipped after that, but to retire at the age of 28 was still a bit surprising. Well, after sitting out the entirety of the 2024 season, I think he changed his mind, because he's back, and this time it's with a division rival of the Cowboys. He signed a 1-year vet min deal with the Commanders. Who knows how much of an impact he'll really make, but I love it for Washington as it's an incredibly low-risk deal that could pay off if he can recapture even just some of his magic from earlier on in his career. He's at least a quality depth piece, wide receiver 4-ish, if he can stay healthy, though after taking off an entire season, I'm not going to put many expectations on him and will simply just be rooting for him upon his return. Someone else that made their return home is wide receiver Brandin Cooks. He signed a 2-year, $13 million deal with the New Orleans Saints, the team that initially drafted him in the 1st round back in 2014. From there, he's played for a bunch of teams: Patriots, Rams, Texans, and most recently the Cowboys. And in that year, last year, he missed 6 games due to an infection in his knee. So he's coming off a bit of a down year, but comes back to a familiar place, albeit he's now catching passes from Derek Carr rather than Drew Brees. Speaking of quarterbacks, old veteran quarterbacks, Aaron Rodgers actually visited the Steelers facility today and met with Mike Tomlin, GM Omar Khan, as well as owner Art Rooney. According to Jerry Dulock, who covers the Steelers, his sources have, quote, cautioned that a commitment from Rodgers may not come today if at all. Tom Pelissero said no deal is done or imminent, but Diana Russini of The Athletic said that Pittsburgh's offer has been on the table, and a source told her, quote, "It's possible an agreement is reached today." Well, okay, it doesn't look like a deal is going to get done today. The Steelers and Aaron Rodgers, per Tom Pelissero, have had contract parameters in place for weeks. It's kind of what Diana Russini said, but money wasn't a discussion point during today's visit. If they're not talking money, they can't really be that close, but I digress. He then said it was merely a chance for both sides to get to know each other. Adam Schefter noted that it was 6 hours, a 6-hour meeting between Aaron Rodgers and the Steelers. That is a god-awful long time. And Warren Sharp goes on to note that the Steelers and Russell Wilson met for 6 hours and he signed a deal with them 2 days later. Well, not too long after that, from a timeline perspective, a year later, Aaron Rodgers and the Steelers met for 6 hours. So, will a deal get done with them sooner rather than later? Time will surely tell, because it is Aaron Rodgers we're talking about after all. Next up, we have to get into this insane story regarding Disney/ESPN wanting to spend a massive amount of money to buy NFL Network, Redzone, and NFL Plus, reportedly for around $2 billion with a B dollars. Talks have been ongoing for the last couple of months. At least reports have noted these convos taking place since then. Basically, the proposed deal would see ESPN take control of NFL Network and NFL Redzone and have those added to an upcoming launch of ESPN's direct-to-consumer streaming platform, codenamed Flagship. While the NFL's interest in this is their desire for greater leverage and carriage deals with cable and satellite operators, i.e., they want to make even more money. This would also strengthen ESPN's partnership as a whole with the NFL. I mean, they've already invested heavily into Monday Night Football, but taking the partnership to another level could open up even more benefits for them. Luke Boma, the author of this article, goes on to say that, quote, "While the outcome of these discussions remains uncertain, a potential ESPN-NFL partnership could have significant implications for the sports media landscape. It could lead to greater accessibility to NFL content for fans, increased competition in the streaming market, and a further strengthening of ESPN's position as a dominant force in sports broadcasting." Well, that leaves me with a bunch of questions and concerns, and many on social media who saw this news fears that ESPN could taint the NFL Network like they have with so many of their own shows that rely on hot takes and irrelevant nonsense for clicks and views. Not all of them are like that, with one of their biggest draws obviously being the Pat McAfee show. But how would that affect the show, if at all? Would they start collabing some of these shows together, maybe even forcing collabs that neither side would actually love? McAfee has already mentioned frustrations with the NFL themselves with his experience of going to the combine and the draft and being treated as lesser than, saying that's why he wouldn't actually be going to future drafts to do his own show on location. I feel like things could get a bit messy as the lines potentially get blurred between the two networks. And then what about the insiders? Ian Rappaport, Mike Garafolo, and Tom Pelissero are all with NFL Network right now. Then ESPN, of course, has their own senior insider, Adam Schefter. How would that work? I mean, maybe nothing at all would change here, and ESPN would allow things to run smoothly and separately as if nothing happened. But do we really think it would be as simple as that? Regardless, it's a situation to monitor, and I would love to get your thoughts on the idea of ESPN buying NFL Network, Redzone, and NFL Plus. Do you think it would actually help if they combined forces to make these products better, or do you fear ESPN would only make things worse no matter how hard they try? Let me know either way in the comments down below, and with that, I'll see y'all next time.